Lu Sheng grew quite impatient. He had no idea who this woman was or why she lived here, but it was clear she was hiding something. Not wanting to waste too much time on her, Lu Sheng glared at her and told her that he had no interest in the house. All he wanted to know was where the man was. The woman, meeting Lu Sheng's gaze, involuntarily took a few steps back. Seconds later, she pointed in a direction and said the man now lived beside the dumpster. She even called him an old madman, mentioning that he went insane after his whole family died. In a soft voice, she added that she hadn't stolen his house because the man had lost his mind. Lu Sheng let out a sigh, then with a light nod, he thanked her, and then left. He didn't want to delve too deep into any dispute between them. His main goal for today was to find the man. As Lu Sheng walked away, the woman breathed a sigh of relief, puzzled why anyone would specifically look for the old madman, but felt reassured that Lu Sheng seemed uninterested in the house. Lu Sheng circled the old building and eventually found the trash heap in a corner. An old man dressed in ragged clothes was rummaging through a garbage bin. Lu Sheng took out a photo of the victim's father, carefully comparing it before calling out the man's name. The man, whose shoes were worn out, his toes were sticking out of them, and his clothes were patched all over, paid no mind to the stench and flies surrounding the garbage bin, but squinted his eyes and looked towards the person when he heard his name. Lu Sheng took a few steps closer, examining him. Seeing Lu Sheng approach, the old man looked at him warily, asking who he was and why he was looking for him. Lu Sheng examined the photo in his hand, likely an old work ID of the man before the tragedy. He figured that the man should be in his late 40s this year. However now, looking at the man before him, with entirely gray hair and a face as dark and wrinkled as dried bark, Lu Sheng couldn't help but sigh, wondering what hardships the old man had endured during this time. Getting no response, the man asked again, this time raising his voice. His tone became more serious. Lu Sheng, however, remained silent. The man had previously worked as a manager in a factory, enjoying a happy family life with his wife and 2 daughters. One night, his younger daughter was abducted on her way home from a night class by people from the Jidao Martial School. Upon hearing the news, the elder daughter went to confront the culprits, however, she never returned. A week later, the bodies of both sisters were found on a riverbank outside of the city, having met with tragic ends. What they went through was unimaginable. Unable to bear the loss, the man's wife took her own life. The man sought help everywhere he could, but to no avail. Finally, after kneeling for weeks at the entrance of the 7th Divine Martial University, he sought out the Martial Saint and begged him to help him. The Martial Saint didn't agree on the spot nor declined. Seeing that Lu Sheng had not responded after his asking twice now, the man instinctively grabbed a garbage bag by his feet, thinking Lu Sheng was there to steal from him. Witnessing this, Lu Sheng felt a pang of sorrow in his heart. After a moment of thought, he finally spoke up, telling the man that he was a classmate of the man's younger daughter and had come specifically to see him. Perhaps hearing his daughter's name sparked as something seemed to suddenly light up. He stepped forward excitedly, examining Lu Sheng, hardly daring to believe, and asked Lu Sheng if he really was his daughter's classmate. Lu Sheng nodded and told the man he was there to help him today. The old man's lips quivered for a moment, but suddenly, his demeanor became fierce. He looked at Lu Sheng angrily, loudly accusing him of lying. As it turned out, the man had searched for all of his daughter's classmates and friends himself. He was sure that Lu Sheng definitely wasn't one of them. The man was not insane as everyone claimed he was, his emotions running high, even going so far as to grab Lu Sheng by the collar, furiously accusing him of deceit. He wondered if Lu Sheng was here trying to take something from him just like everyone else. The man's breathing became rapid, his speech almost incoherent. He stared intently at Lu Sheng, raising his voice to say he remembered those people, every single one of them, but each one had claimed not to have seen his daughter. His eyes gradually reddened, veins bulging. With a bitter smile, he shook his head, knowing they were all lying. How could it be that none had seen her? They were simply afraid of telling the truth. His voice grew more suppressed towards the end, and he crouched down as if about to cry. Lu Sheng took a deep breath, patted the man's shoulder, apologized for claiming to be his daughter's classmate, and then crouched down beside him. However, he calmly and earnestly insisted that he indeed came to help. The man seemed confused, his gaze landing on Lu Sheng as if he had discovered something. He suddenly grabbed Lu Sheng's hand. He then excitedly asked if Lu Sheng was a powerful martial artist. Upon receiving a nod in affirmation, the man's demeanor transformed to one of joy, as if he had finally seen hope after years of waiting. The man had already met many martial artists, and could almost recognize one at a glance. He then turned, squatting down to rummage through his burlap bag, pulling out various bottles and jars, and some loose change, offering all his treasures to Lu Sheng if he could help him kill the Lian father and son. Lu Sheng looked at the items in the man's hand covered in flies, but didn't say anything. Seeing Lu Sheng's silence, the man grew anxious, and after several seconds, eventually, he discarded everything clattering to the ground. His body trembled with fear, worried that Lu Sheng might refuse due to the insufficient amount of money. He hurriedly promised that he could earn more, insisting that selling the scrap could still fetch some money. The man begged Lu Sheng for help. He had nothing left, even offering his own life if necessary. Lu Sheng observed the desperate man before him. At this very moment, there was no expression on Lu Sheng's face, and no one knew what he was thinking at that moment. However, the old man suddenly fell silent. He squatted on the ground, head bowed. From his tone, it seemed to be filled with self-mockery and despair. As he looked at the bottles and jars, some shattered, tears welled up in his eyes. He didn't think Lu Sheng would help him anymore and started to mutter to himself, questioning whether Lu Sheng had come just to mock him, or perhaps the Jidao Martial Arts School had sent him to check if he was dead yet. The old man then burst into laughter, yet tears continued to stream down his face. He gritted his teeth with hatred, vowing to keep living no matter what, to survive until he saw the demise of those responsible for his family's tragedy. His eyes, bloodshot, stared fiercely at Lu Sheng. His words were venomous, yet determined to live until he could witness their tragic death, to see them descend and rot in hell. Lu Sheng squatted down, picking up a photo that had become yellow and faded and lay among the debris. It was a family portrait of the man, a moment captured years ago when they were still a warm and intact family. Perhaps no one would have thought the tragedy would happen to them. Holding the photo, Lu Sheng told the man he would borrow it for a while and calmly assured him, "You will see it happen, I promise you." The old man paused as if he hadn't heard clearly. By the time he looked up again, Lu Sheng was already walking away. The old man's gaze followed him in confusion, his dry lips repeatedly murmuring, "Thank you, thank you." Tears flowed as he thought. Even if Lu Sheng was lying to him, he was grateful. Lu Sheng exhaled slowly, feeling slightly relieved. He had thought his mental fortitude was strong, as he only wanted to focus solely on his own family, martial arts, and preventing the catastrophe 10,000 years from now. Taking on this task was simply an act of convenience. After all, with so much darkness and tragedy in the world, he couldn't possibly help everyone. Yet, something about this man's plight struck a particularly something within him. Suddenly, a voice came from behind. It was a chubby man in shorts and a tank top, smoking a cigarette. Taking a deep drag, he exhaled before speaking to Lu Sheng, telling him that it's been a long time since anyone came looking for the old man. Curious, Lu Sheng asked if it used to happen more often. The chubby man replied with a bitter smile, saying it was frequent, but mostly by those looking to swindle the man's money. In the years following his family's demise, the man, driven mad by grief, sought help for revenge from anyone who was a martial artist, offering his life savings and everything else he had in return. However, everyone knew the culprit behind his family's tragedy was the Jidao Martial School. Eventually, the man was cheated out of everything, including his sanity and even his home. The chubby man approached Lu Sheng for a chat, noting that Lu Sheng hadn't taken the man's money, which he found commendable, otherwise he wouldn't waste a single second talking to him. After another puff of his cigarette, he curiously asked what Lu Sheng was there for. Lu Sheng smiled, and simply replied that he would go, find them, and then kill these bastards. The chubby man was stunned, only until the ash from his cigarette fell onto his thigh, snapping him back to reality. Meanwhile, at the 7th Divine Martial University, a cloaked person sat in the Zhao's office, sipping on his beverage. While blowing on the steam,